we are here with I guess this is the fourth or fifth, I don't remember, installment of what I'm calling the Urk files here on Theta N. We're with Mr. Ken. We've gotten some amazing insights. His candor is evident. It's honest, and whether you agree with anything that we're saying or not, at least you can't shoot us down for hiding the truth. At least as we perceive it and as we know it. That's all we can ask for. You know, we might be wrong on some of these subjects. Ken and I might differ in opinion, but this is the way I think we progress. So without any further ado, Ken, we're gonna pick up right where we left off, which was with we were talking about the kids, and you kind of gave me a rundown of each kid and their personality and some notable events in their lives. But one thing we haven't really touched on very much is Mary Sue.
Right.
And she is, I mean, probably beyond people like yourself. I mean, as far as importance in Scientology and the history of it, she's pretty up there in importance. And very few people talk about her or kind of delve into her life, especially the later years, which I guess we're never going to find out because she didn't leave a biography. So let's start with her. I know that there was one funny incident when you first started at the manor where she prepared a steak in a very unusual way, and that was kind of your introduction to the woman. So let's start there. Let's start with that particular day when you arrived and were charged with cooking.
Well, all right. It was actually the second day. I got there on a Saturday, and on the Saturday, other domestic staff at St. Hill were helping me. On the Sunday, one of the women helped me in the morning. I think she helped me with getting the Hubbard's first meal of the day ready. That would be around the middle of the day. But that she left, and I was on my own with regard to the evening meal. And the set menu for the evening meal was a fillet steak and some veggies. I think there was a tomato cocktail to begin with. It was nothing dramatic or fancy or difficult. There were directions for how the steak was to be cooked, and these looked strange. The directions looked strange to me. I didn't know if that would work. Anyway, I'm ready. I'm just about ready to start cooking the steak. I'm on my own in this kitchen, and in comes Mary Sue Hubbard. We have not been introduced. I hadn't spoken to her ever before, and she proceeds to get ready to cook the steak. And she's doing this without taking any notice of me whatever, which I'm finding a little strange.
So you're just kind of a ghost in the kitchen that she's ignoring.
I just wasn't there to be spoken to.
Okay.
So I just stood back and kept myself ready to step forward and do something if she wanted me to. But I was taking the hint that she didn't want me doing or saying anything. So I left it at that. She finished cooking the steaks, and then she gave me she said something about how it was to be served, or some very little, not very important instruction. I don't think she looked me in the eye, and she left. So it was time to get on with serving the meal, and I served it. After a few minutes, well, after maybe 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, I went back into the dining room, and there was complete silence. He and Mary Sue were eating their meal, and as I came in, he kind of looked towards me and he said, "It's too salty." No, I need to go back. I'm sorry, I left it out. The instructions were that you had to get your pan and fill it with a layer of salt. No fat, just the salt. You got it hot and you put your steak on and cooked it.
Unusual.
So he complains to me that his steak is too salty. I'm not a bit surprised. So, but I was relieved, and when Mary Sue spoke up at once and she said, I cooked the steak. So I waited for a little bit for some instructions, just go and cook something else, or she would say, cook such and such, but no instructions came. She had eaten her steak happily. I removed the plate and I served a dessert, and that was it. And that was my introduction to Mary Sue Hubbard.
Okay. At least she took responsibility for her salty steak.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then moving forward from there, what was the relationship like? What observations can you tell us about Mary Sue?
Well, as regards myself, she was reserved for quite a long time. It was weeks, I think, before she relaxed and started seeming to regard me as human and worthy to be looked at and spoken to. But she did come around, and we became, in a very quiet way, we became good friends. And I think a large part of that had to do with the fact that I was serving her husband, and he apparently had no complaints. So that would be very important for her.
Right.
Because she looked out for him. And in other general terms, I wasn't making a nuisance of myself as far as she was concerned.
Okay.
So I guess somebody had kindly tipped her off before my arrival about how bad I was in some way or another, and she had taken that on board and was getting ready, I think, to get me shipped out as soon as she had an excuse. But I wasn't giving her any excuses. So we settled down, and there was a little procedure she took up in which she was looking after me, and that had to do with bank holidays. Those, you know what a bank holiday is. Mm-hmm. People generally are allowed to take a day off work. Well, normally the cook would take the day off. And because the cook was off, I would do that job on that day. And Mary Sue would always ask me before a bank holiday, are you taking the day off? Or are you taking a day off in lieu of the bank holiday day? I would normally say no. And she says, well, be sure to put in for the extra day's pay. Mm-hmm. I was entitled to have the day's pay in lieu of the day off. Right. And one of the 2 years I was doing that post, we came to the Easter holiday. And in those days, Easter was 2 days, 2 bank holidays. There was Easter Friday and Easter Monday. So that was a 4-day weekend. And just before the Easter, she was asking me, are you taking both days off? And I said no. And she said, be sure to put in your PO for the 2 days pay. Well, as it happened, I did take a day. However, somehow she paid me for the 2 days. And I didn't think this was a big deal. I thought next time I'm working on a bank holiday, I'll do it for free. I won't claim the day's wages. No big deal. So I thought to myself, well, I'll tell her if she brings it up. I'll tell her beforehand. If she doesn't bring it up, I won't mention it. She's very busy. And I'm certainly not going to bring it up while they're eating their meal.
Right.
So along comes the next bank holiday, and she's reminding me to put in the PO for my day's pay. And I said, well, the last time I got an extra day's pay, that wasn't justified. So I'm not putting in for a day's pay this time. And this was, of course, at the table. And LRH looked up towards me. He didn't actually look at me in the eye. And he said very lugubriously, "Thank you for getting off the withhold." I was thoroughly ARC broken. That was a very wrong indication. So it wasn't a withhold.
Right.
I'd withheld nothing. Anyway, I was serving him his veggies, and I was very clearly thinking of giving him his veggies in his lap, but I didn't. So I don't know if there's any other particular exchange between Mary Sue and myself. We didn't exchange much. She tended to keep herself at arm's distance from other people close to him. And I accepted that as something very sensible on her part, because she could so easily find herself a little bit compromised.
Yeah. Right. As we mentioned, anyone who gets close to LRH tends to get shot. So she at any point could have gotten accused of being part of a cabal or something, or some kind of
something could have happened.
Yeah.
She could have found herself perhaps in a position where she had not supported LRH as much as she felt she should have, because some friend had involved her in some way and taken her attention off what she felt was her primary duty, which was supporting him. So, and of course, if she got involved closely with somebody very close to LRH, as I happened to be, mostly physically rather than otherwise, then the danger was even greater. So I respected that viewpoint of hers, and I never pushed anything on her.
Okay. In general, what was her demeanor like? Was she very conservative? Was she an expressive person, or more reserved?
Well, she could vary. She had a great natural dignity, which normally was kind of reserved.
Mm-hmm.
But she could be very, very, very sociable and very, very pleasant, very charming. She could have a laugh and a giggle with anybody, and she would enjoy it. If she felt she had to do something to protect her position or to shield LRH, she could be ferocious, or the children for that matter, or perhaps even more for the children. She would be ferocious if she felt she had to take action.
Anything of note regarding that? Any particular moment?
No, I never saw anything, but I heard stories.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe I should say I'm basing that on stories, not on what I observed. But you could tell from her demeanor, I will say this, I definitely felt from her demeanor that if I had hurt LRH in some way, she would have been quite ferocious with me, because I'd done that.
Yeah.
And with anybody else who harmed him.
Right.
There was, you would take that as obvious from her demeanor and her behavior. They were very close as a couple when I was in the manor. Several times I might be with him and he'd be talking to me, maybe on the staircase, and she would pass by, and they would greet each other affectionately. He would call her Susie, usually, or honey, and she would normally call him sugar. They'd have a conversation, and it might involve something to do with business. If it did, it was very brief, very to the point, and she would go on her way with a very definite idea of what would come out of the conversation. If it wasn't to do with business, just kind of social, they would part, usually in a joking way. He'd make a joke and they'd both laugh. She slept in her own bedroom on the same floor, down a corridor, and it was quite common for me to go up to his bedroom when he had called down to the kitchen to say he was getting up. I would go up with a cup of hot chocolate. And it was quite common for me as I was coming up to the first floor where they lived, that would be the second floor in American, to see her flit out from his bedroom and across the landing down to her bedroom in her white nightdress and negligee and her dressing gown.
Okay, so they had relations like any normal couple, conjugal visits, you want to say. But was it standard in England, or was it common for husband and wife to have separate rooms? Or I know in some cases separate beds was kind of common, but I didn't know about separate rooms.
If the house is big enough, then the lady of the house would normally have her own bedroom.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. As far as tech development, are you aware of, like, how did she help him? Did she not help him? How was she involved, at least from what you could see, with the development of some of the tech? Because there's been some things that have been attributed to her. I don't know if that's true or not. And I know there's been some stuff released about in the early days they were working together on the e-meter and stuff like that to discover things. Can you shed any insight or anything you observed there?
No, sorry. She wasn't doing, as far as I know, she wasn't doing anything on TechLine when I was there. She was more on admin executive.
Okay.
Posts.
Okay. Yeah, you didn't see it. Okay. Did the relationship change once they got on the ship and there was more pressure on both of them, I can imagine?
You froze.
I'm sorry. I'll give it to you again. Did the relationship change after they got onto the ship, and now there was a lot more commotion and responsibilities and things like that?
Well, again, I wasn't there when she left to go to the ship. I was still back at St. Hill. So I don't know exactly what was going on. I know she was on the Athena, smaller ship, for a while. While he was there, that would be in Las Palmas, and I think he was living ashore. And she was probably living ashore, but she was working off the ship, I know. Other than that, I don't know what they were doing together.
I'm referring to once everyone was on the ship. When you were on the ship and Mary Sue, did their relationship change at all? Was it still very cordial and loving and all that kind of stuff?
Let me see. When I was first on the ship, I was down in the tween decks, so I wasn't up in the space where they moved together. He had his office up on the prom deck, and she had an office on the prom deck, like all the other aides did, and I was very rarely up there. When I became CS7, I had an office up on the prom deck, and I would say the change, the relationship was different. It was a little more formal. It was like she was very conscious that she was in the Sea Org and he was the Commodore. And she was very busy.
Yeah.
Mary Sue was always the busy woman. That's what she did. She got on with whatever she had to do. There were, well, yeah, the relationship was a little more subdued. He was busy being the Commodore. And of course, whenever she was with him, at least up on deck, anybody around could observe her and how she behaved. And I think she was conscious of that and didn't behave she wasn't unfriendly, but she didn't behave in a familiar manner.
Mm.
She allowed him to be always the Commodore.
Right. That's the word I was looking for. Familiarity. If that familiarity was still there, yeah.
Yes, but she could still, she was still very free in her expression. When I remember at least 3 times. Now, I never ever saw the traffic between LRH and MSH. And most of it was actually verbal.
Mm.
The written comment almost never saw. So I didn't ever know what was actually going on between them with regard to geo operations. But except for probably at least 3 times, maybe 4, I would be in my office. I'd now become LRH personal comm, and she came out of her office and she marched up to the door of his office and said in a very firm voice, "Okay, I resign." Turned on her heel and went back to her office. Well, he always handled that perfectly, as far as I could see, because 2 seconds, the messenger would be called into his office and the messenger would run to Mary Sue. And I guess the messenger would say, "The Commodore wants to see you." And she would go in. They'd close the door so that nobody could hear what went on between them. And within a few minutes, she'd come out and they'd be laughing. So whatever her problem was, he completely solved it or helped her to resolve it. That happened a few times.
Now that's a skill, to take a very angry wife and turn her back to a happy wife in a few minutes. Sure, a lot of guys can relate to not being able to do that. Kudos to LRH for that.
Yes. And she wasn't only an unhappy wife, she was an unhappy guardian.
True.
Or controller, and that would make it a lot more complicated. But yes, he was, whatever he did it beautifully. There was one other time when we sort of interacted to do with LRH, and this was earlier when I was CS7. He sent his messenger out to us to get from me a copy of an ED he had written recently. It wasn't the last one. So the description wasn't very clear, but I got the one I thought was it, and I gave it to the messenger. She ran in, and then she comes back and says, "No, it's not that one." Well, I'm kind of lost.
Mm.
So I give her another recent one, and then she takes it in. There's a roar. Out she comes again. "No, it's that one." So, I'm in a panic. I don't know what to do. I still think it's the first one. So I give her another one, and this goes on for a few minutes. And then Mary Sue comes out of her office. I guess she's distracted by this quest. And she comes over and she says, "What's up?" So I said, he wanted an ED, and I think it's this one. And she took it and took it into him, and she said, "There." And she came back and said, "Yes, that's the one."
Hmm.
And you could feel that there was an understanding of the difficulty that he had caused.
Yeah.
And she didn't say a word. I didn't expect her to. She just left and went back to her office. There was another occasion. I'm jumping about in time. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
This would be, I think around 70. Well, it was the time when Quentin was assigned to the. Oh, we went over this the last time. She came and asked me, "Whose evil purpose is?"
Right.
Was I dramatizing? Yeah.
Directed towards not you.
Yeah.
She wanted that to be heard.
Yeah. But I never bore her any ill will for that. I just knew she was beside herself.
Yeah. Now, regards to the GO, sorry to cut in here. I just wanted to ask for lost my train of thought with it.
Oh, sorry.
Was it really driven entirely by LRH, or do you think the theory that Mary Sue and some of the Guardians went rogue caused a lot of the issues of the GO? So the stuff about penetrating government offices and things like that. There's two kind of theories. One was, of course, LRH, and the other one was no, it was just rogue agents and they messed things up, which sounds to me like a PR thing. What do you think?
Well, I didn't observe how it started. I wouldn't expect to have observed what he did at the beginning. He may have ordered it. For all I know, it's perfectly reasonable to believe that he started it. It might have been an idea that Mary Sue came up with. It might have been an idea that somebody down in the GO came up with and sent up. But it was started either at his order or with his knowledge and approval.
Okay.
And it wouldn't have been started without his knowledge and approval.
That clarifies it. Yeah. Okay. So his hands were not clean on the matter, is what.
Oh, no. And I think anything major or important that the GO did, especially Snow White, was at his instigation.
Okay. Why do you think they ended up basically separated at the end for many, many years? Why didn't they end up together and dying together as most normal elderly people do? What do you think happened there?
He allowed his roots to go out. She may have had out roots. I don't know. She was not in good health. She was in pretty poor health from probably 72 on. And he was trying to look after her. He was CSing her folder. He had some supervision over her diet. But after he came back from his sojourn in New York, he was different. I have no truck with people who say that he was taken over by other beings. I don't think that's true at all. But he had changed his own estimation of what reality is and what he was being called on to do in that reality. And there was a noticeable separation between them. It wasn't overt, and it wasn't violent. It wasn't a violent emotion. They were just getting a little more distant from each other. And in 73, I think it was, he had his household unit. That included people like his steward and his cook and someone to do the laundry, and I forget who else. This household unit was in the personal office, and I was in charge of the personal office. I didn't pay it a lot of attention because, there was so much else demanding my attention, and it generally went fairly well. However, especially after he came back from New York, he got very sensitive about the food in his stomach. And he would get quite strange about it. And I remember one time he started complaining that they were putting glass in his fruit, which is completely ridiculous.
What year was this? Sorry to interrupt.
This would be 73. I think it was mostly 73, maybe early 74.
All right, thank you. Carry on.
Right. And Mary Sue was on her own rather strange diet. She was a vegetarian and eating lots of raw stuff. Where was I going? I've forgotten. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think so. So she was very concerned about her health. She was also very busy. And one day, this is in, I think, 74. And I remember that since he came back, he had lost confidence in me, and we were not really as close as we'd been before. But he once just muttered to me that, he says, I've just got my own lawyers in DC because I don't trust the GO. And I was very sad to hear that. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask any questions. I never asked any questions about the GO because it was perfectly obvious that I was supposed to know nothing that I could be cross-examined about in court.
Yeah, makes sense. Security.
Right. Yeah. So I thought, well, this is the beginning of the end. He's bypassing her and not telling her. So that was very sad. That was the beginning of the end.
Shock. Yeah, shock for sure.
Yes. Now, later, what I saw was, I think I mentioned this, I didn't see any particularly overt signs of fission between them. But as I mentioned earlier, when we got to Flag, there was the big raid in LA, and he wanted me to cover his ass, which didn't impress me. And then he wanted to make very sure that nobody ever said anything to the press about him and Mary Sue.
Right. And
that pushed me over an edge. I couldn't stomach that, because she was the person he was most beholden to throughout his career as a leader of Scientology. He could not have got anywhere near what he got to without her.
Right.
Now, she was not perfect by any means. Nobody is. But he owed her a lot more than he showed with regard to her, with that raid and her being in court and in prison. What else?
What were her health issues? Just general fatigue, or what were her? From 72 on, she was ill. What was her condition or problem?
It was something to do in her midriff.
Okay, it's a digestive thing or something.
Yeah.
Okay. And did that ever get handled as far as you saw?
No, she died of cancer in that region. As far as I know, I know. Those are the reports I heard.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well. Why do you think she didn't, after her and LRH separated up, obviously some ARC breaks, they got distant. why do you think she just completely disappeared, didn't write a memoir, didn't do anything? She just basically was like, see ya. I mean,
So I think she was loyal. She was loyal to the old LRH that she had always been loyal to. The old LRH. And I know very well myself how easy it is to hold on to that vision of him, or that experience of him, and to give him so much leeway to be as bad as he became.
yeah. Yeah.
Once you've given your allegiance to that, the good side of him, it was very, very, very hard to withdraw it, in my experience.
Yeah. I gotcha. All right, so let's establish the dates again. So 65-ish, 66, things start to get a little bit more serious with Scientology and LRH. Ethics is brought in. Sea Org is formed. Then New York happens, and that's a major shift in his valence. Even another big shift in his valence. Would you say?
Yes. I think that the New York episode was a continuation of a shift that had already occurred. I think that's the emergence of the valence. The valence was always there, but it became a lot stronger after he was refused permission to remain a resident in the UK.
In the UK, right. It's after the Rhodesia incident. He goes to the UK. So he got rejected from Rhodesia, then gets rejected from the UK. It's understandable. And plus, there was verifiable third-party agency interference. So CIA, FBI, why not? Always sticking their nose in the thing. Speaking of which, why do you think the FBI and the CIA and whoever else, I don't think the NSA existed back then, but why was the government so after him?
I don't know that I can answer that question fully and correctly, but he was a very unwilling taxpayer. And anything he could do to not pay taxes, he was up to doing and get away with. The Sea Org and the church finances were set up to shield enormous amounts of money from scrutiny and taxation. So that in itself made him bait.
Sure. Well, a lot of people do that. A lot of people do that.
But he had expressed himself over the years with a great deal of contempt for the US government. That didn't win him any friends in Washington, or in the political circles. I don't know what else. I don't know what gossip was going around and getting into their files and into their ears, which riled them up. I just don't know.
Okay. Was there any sense that they wanted to just grab the technology for themselves because it was powerful, or they didn't care and they just wanted to get rid of this pest?
They just wanted to give him a bad time. I don't think I saw no sign that they wanted the technology.
Okay. Good.
I don't know that I would have.
Yeah, good to hear, because that's another thing. That's another thing that floats around. Like, oh, they were trying to take over the thing because the OT levels allow you to remote view, and they wanted it for themselves. I'm like, well, the technology's already out and about. So,
well, I understood when he was kicked out of the UK. I understood somehow, I forget how, that he was very concerned that he was being kicked out so that they could get their hands on the clearing course materials, which were on file at St. Hill.
okay.
And that worried him immensely. I understood.
What did he feel would happen if that got out?
I,
Just that they would be able to control people with the N
yeah,
word?
they'd run black Scientology. They'd use it to suppress people,
Interesting.
harm people.
Well, guys, that material is now out there, widely spread in the world via the internet. So I guess it behooves us to watch out for misapplication of it, because it is out. It's all out. All right. So that kind of wraps up my Mary Sue segment of the questions. Unless you have anything else to add about that.
Well, it's interesting that in about 1994, around that time, I was living in New Jersey in South Orange. I was thinking of Mary Sue, who was at the time in prison. And I was thinking in a very friendly way about her, and so sorry that she had to go through this thing of being in prison, especially since her husband had kind of dumped her. So I wrote her a letter, well aware that she would, of course, know that I was independent and had been declared. And I wrote anyway, and she wrote back.
Oh,
She
really?
wrote a very nice, friendly letter back.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I still have the letter. I treasure it.
That is very cool. These little bits of Theta is what I love. These little like moments. Very cool. Okay, now also in our last talk.
Sorry, this is something else.
Okay, go for it.
Mary Sue was of the opinion that I was afraid of the messenger.
Okay.
I never talked about it with her. I came across this opinion of hers twice. I never talked about it with her. The natural fact, I was not afraid of the messengers. I had to be very watchful in what I did and said regarding the messengers, because I knew that a huge amount of trouble could be caused because they had the Commodore's ear. And I didn't suspect any of the messengers on the ship would be looking to cause mischief for me, but the possibility was very real. So I was very circumspect with them, because anything that they might take offense to was to give them offense was to give offense to LRH. And he was never slow, or usually never slow, to respond to any personal offense.
But you weren't scared of them particularly. It was just kind of the repercussions of what, yeah.
It was an organizational thing. And I would also add that people have said, well, one person has said to me that I failed to restrain Hubbard, which in a way is true. But the word restrain is not a word you would ever use with L. Ron Hubbard. He was not restrainable. But I did fail. I think it's quite true to say I failed to influence him to behave a bit better.
Right. We've already talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, you could say I could have influenced him completely out of that valence. I don't know. But I didn't like what he was doing. I didn't hide it. He could have taken it up with me. He didn't. Mary Sue must have seen it. He must have mentioned it to her. I would think he mentioned it to her. She didn't take it up with me. But I can tell you quite honestly that if Mary Sue had come to me quietly and said, and just raised the question of what he was doing and how he was doing it, I would have been very glad to talk to her about it. I would have jumped at the chance. But I knew that if I took it up with Mary Sue, it was more than likely that she would report me to him.
Right, third partying, basically. They would have nailed you.
Yeah.
They would have nailed you.
And I didn't dare broach the subject with any of the aides because the same thing would happen.
Yeah, probably needed to be a full frontal attack, not an attack. But yeah, maybe an attack. Talk to the man. Talk to the man directly. But I don't think anyone has the cojones to do that.
Nobody could have done anything without Mary Sue's support.
Ah, good point. Good point. Good point.
Nobody. And she showed no signs of reducing her loyalty to him.
No cracks. No cracks there.
No.
In any event, if anyone watching this is not a Scientologist, has no interest in Scientology, it's a very interesting study in power and being close to power and the dynamic around that. Because it seems like, you know, that's not exclusive to LRH and Mary Sue. That's kings and queens. That's the head of a corporation and the right-hand person. It's all that. We can see how that plays out even here with Ron and Mary Sue, and how we might learn some lessons regarding that, just for the world in general.
Yeah.
So even if you're not a Scientologist, this has value.
Yes, exactly. It's a good study on what Hubbard had misconceptions about power. I think I went into this before, but there's an example, an interesting example of how the power was playing out at that level when he had incarcerated himself down in his suite with the accident after the motorcycle thing. His broken bone after that accident. And he was just being a bloody pest with the noise and fuss that he was making over himself. And nobody on the prom deck, that's including Mary Sue, seemed to be very bothered. Nobody said anything, but it was like we were all thinking, my God, when is he going to get over this and get back and being adult and, you know, being sensible?
Yeah.
We have to put up with this nonsense. We've got our jobs to do, but this is going on and it's no help. Anyway, after a while, he sent up one of his messengers, Jill Goodman, and he had told her to go to his aides and to say to them, my officers are not backing me up. And I don't know exactly how he told her to deliver the message, but she poked her head in my office and said, the Commodore says my officers are not backing me up, and she left. So there was nothing for me to answer to. But she went and did this with all of the aides. And the last one, she poked her head out and said, my officers are not backing me up. I heard her say this to Mary Sue, and then I heard the sound of a slap. And I thought to myself, it's not Jill's fault at all.
God.
But that slap was very well deserved.
Now, was she allowed to go deliver that to LRH, or did she have to?
Jill would have had no choice but to go down to the Commodore and tell him what had happened.
But not slap him. But she couldn't slap him.
No. But by slapping a Commodore's messenger, especially when on duty, you were slapping the Commodore.
Yeah, I thought she might want to.
I'm sorry.
Physically deliver the slap.
Yes. Oh, I got you. No, she didn't go down and slap him straight. I'm sure she didn't do that.
Okay.
And then the rest of that story is that nothing ever came of it. Nobody changed.
Yeah.
and no other challenge came from him. So the quality of the exercise of power had changed very strangely up on that deck.
It's sad. It's sad because who knows if even if he was at that point spinning and the officers he's referring to are some whole track thing that he's dramatizing, you know, with you guys, and it's not really not a right target. He's in pain. He's got like a broken rib or something like that, right? I think it was a rib or
Collarbone, I think it was.
whatever it was. He's in pain. Nobody's giving him assists, or he's not giving himself assists or whatnot, or he's not solving the problem. He's in full blown dramatization. And here's all this tech that isn't being applied, whether it's a condition or assists, like something to get out of it. And it's not so much a case of the emperor has no clothes, because I think everyone was perceiving that he's being a pest, but just that when you want to cover your butt, you have to sometimes play the political game and not do what you know is right. Because any one of those guys could have been, including yourself, could have been like, let's talk to Mary Sue, let's do something, even just to help him, because he's in a lot of pain, you know, and let's see what tech we can apply or whatnot. I mean, he was obviously PTS, right? For his own writings, it's a PTS situation. So what's his item? Well, did he ever find his item? Did he ever handle? These questions remain. These questions remain as to what technical handlings were done on the man, and if
he needed an ethics handler.
Yeah, he needed ethics, including PTSSP, right? So he needed the ethics handling, needed some tech applied, assists, you know,
he needed to demonstrate some responsibility for his own condition in that situation.
For sure.
And he was aggressively denying that responsibility. So where could we go?
Right. Oh, well, lessons learned, or maybe lessons observed, and maybe one day learned. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's the right answer, because we seem to not learn a lot of lessons as human beings. All right. Speaking of anything else that you want to add about Mary Sue before we move on?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. So last time you mentioned, I asked you if you were married or had kids or had ever ventured into that thing. You said, you know, it's a long story. And I said, can you say it quickly? And you were like, no. So now we have time. So what was the long story that you wanted to relate about that, if anything?
Well, I don't know that I ever want to relate it.
Okay.
But if somebody's interested and wants to know, I can say what I know.
Fair enough.
Right. So I was told a little while ago that there had been some speculation, I think on Facebook or somewhere, about my sexuality. I think it's something that people have a right to be curious about. We're all interested in other people and how other people manage their lives. So I'm willing to talk about it to some degree. It's not an easy thing to talk about because there are some deep emotions involved. But of course, people have observed that I have not married, and that on the whole, I've not had girlfriends. And it wasn't that there was a lack of opportunity on the ship. I had certain advantages that were very much in demand, particularly that I had a cabin of my own.
Sure.
And also my position. But I've always been a loner. And I think this stems not only from my track, but from experiences in this lifetime, which have more than molded me I've had experiences when I was younger that stamped me. I'm not the only one, and I'm not complaining about what happened. And I can, many people can say, well, I had much worse than you did. And I still married and had children, or whatever else they're comparing me with. I don't think I'm a success in the world at all. I've never sought to be. But as regards marriage and children, I'll tell you that my teen years were very difficult because I was living alone with my father, who was, he himself, well, first of all, he was sexually suppressed. But he was, in addition to that, he was not mentally healthy. He was mentally ill. And he had an accident when I was 12, which he had concussion, and it made the imbalances in his head much worse. And he was already abusive, but he became extremely abusive. And I was living with him more or less alone. I had one older brother who was still at school. He went away to school. He would come home during his holidays, but other than that, we were alone. He certainly didn't abuse me sexually, ever. He once abused me physically with a very violent intention. And had I thought about it at the time, I could have turned him into the police.
Wow.
But it actually was not dangerous. It was very close. So he was he had himself a very hard life, and he had an experience when he was a boy that one can't imagine the effect on his psyche, and that was that he went home from school when he was 8 years old in Glasgow, and he went into the tenement flat that they lived in, and he found his mother on the kitchen floor with her head in the gas oven. And what that did to his psyche, you wouldn't want to imagine.
Right.
Anyway, there was then a stepmother, and that stepmother relationship was unhappy for him and his brother. So when he lost his wife, shortly after I was born, he decided that he would be father and mother. And that was enough for him. He thought he could, he knew he could do that. He had no clue. So when I went back after leaving Scotland, he was very difficult to get on with, and I couldn't understand why he was getting so upset. And he would talk to me for hours angrily, and I just never knew what it was I'd done wrong. Anyway, it just got worse and worse, and then he had this accident, and it became unbearable. And I was going to school locally, so I was living in the house, and I ended up in breakdown. Towards the end of my time in that house, I was at school having an argument with another boy. I think it must have been in the last year, and that would be 1956. And we were just going head to head. I think we'd forgotten what the argument was about. He was insisting he was right, and I was insisting I was right. Real stupid. Neither of us would back down, and I got so angry my arm went out and bashed him on his arm. But I'd forgotten. I just was so unaware of what I was doing. I was just completely unaware of the whole situation. I was holding in my hand a pen. And we're looking back at the 50s. And in those days, we still had dip pens that we used.
Sharp.
We had, we had ink wells on the desk. This
Ouch.
is what we wrote with. But I had one in my hand, and I actually stabbed him in the arm with my pen. And we were both shocked. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get into terrible trouble. So I went through his shirt, and his mother's going to scream at me. And then he's going to report it to the school staff, and I'm, who knows what's going to happen. As it turned out, nothing happened. But I was at home that evening. I'm wondering, how come this happened? My arm just went out all on its own. I hadn't even thought of doing such a thing. I just got so angry. I almost wanted to kill him. But I could have killed him. And then the answer came to me very clearly. I'm not saying it's correct, and I'm not saying I wasn't doing some teen drama. But the answer came to me, I have inherited my father's bad temper.
Heck of a postulate.
So then I think to myself, if that's so, then my children are going to grow up to feel about my behavior the way I feel about his.
Gotcha.
And it was very clear to me that I could not possibly do such a thing to a child. And that meant I wasn't going to have children.
Wow.
I couldn't take the risk. And then the next thing that occurred to me was, what does that mean about marriage?
Sure.
Right? So, rather strangely, I immediately found myself taking part in a movie in the future. I'm in the kitchen. I'm doing veggies or a salad or something. My wife is in the kitchen, and she's going on at me the way my father goes on at me, or used to go on at me. And it rubs the nerves in my ear like he's rubbing it with an old rusty file. Goes on and it doesn't stop. She's doing this. And as the movie progresses, my arm shoots out with the knife.
Oh, God.
So my next decision is no marriage. So I always had a secret hope that I would meet somebody that would kind of nullify that, so that I would feel safe and not putting the woman at risk. And I never did.
Gotcha. You never tried to address that through auditing or whatever, or just change the postulate?
That's an interesting question. There's a great deal in my early years which was traumatic because of my mother's illnesses and then death, and how the family dealt with me in her death. That stumped me thoroughly and deeply. That could have been handled. Then all the stuff with my father, that was never addressed. Partly because I think I had it buried, although I did bring some of it up. It was never taken up. But I think I was part of the movement that was fixated on what's coming out next.
Right.
And what's the next OT level, and how do I get on it? It was all OT, OT, OT.
Yeah.
Another factor in that was that I never withheld anything about it, but I knew, and it just never came up in session. It's just something hard to understand, but it just didn't. But I knew perfectly well that if we had run incidents concerning my father and his behavior, he would have been declared SP. And I wasn't going to go for that. I was not going to disconnect from him.
Right. You had mentioned this earlier. Right.
I did. Okay. Right. So if it had come up in session, I would have dealt with it, but it didn't come up. If I'd been asked about it out of session, I would have, depending on who asked.
Right, because if you have a bad ethics officer and they make you
Yeah.
disconnect, that's a disaster. It would have been out tech actually, because you're not supposed to destroy families, and could have just handled it. Good roads, good weather, the occasional communication. Hi, Dad, whatnot. Glad to see you. Rah, 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 rah. Thanks, but I'm having a great day today. There's all kind of stuff you can do. I just it's on a personal note. I wish that would have gotten handled for you many years ago. I think it should have. Just doesn't seem that hard, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. And my own attitude is that I got myself born into that family, and if that puts some shit on my plate, well, it's my plate to clean.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are lessons that I needed to learn, and I got them full in the face.
Okay, well, thank you for clearing all that up. I'm hoping that for the people who are questioning sexuality, this is a very good explanation, and they can move on with their lives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Now there's a couple of more viewer questions here. This is a long one. I'm going to read the whole thing as I'm prone to do, just to get all their thoughts down. So this says, "Hi Willie, I know Ken and adore him. Here are some questions for the interview. I felt very badly because I feel I may have deterred you," speaking to you, "from writing your book many years ago. I had read your writings and was very excited about your descriptions and thought it was about you, and I meant to encourage that and not have your life identified a particular way. Will you be completing your book?" Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think I know who this is, and I want to tell her that it's perfectly okay. I didn't notice that there was no response, but you were free not to respond, so I didn't take it personally. If I'm talking to the person I'm thinking of. Anyway,
you are.
all right. I kept trying to write a book. I'd get the first third or so written, and then I'd have no clue about how to continue it. So eventually I gave up. I have the first third written. I've considered publishing it and seeing if it raises any interest, and if so, what interest, and based on that, I could write some more. But I haven't published, and I don't have any response, so I'm not writing anymore at the moment. I'm willing to, but I need to know what people are interested in hearing about before I start writing. Otherwise, I feel I'm just talking to myself, and it's quite possible that nobody else will have any interest whatever.
I've read, you shared with me some of these chapters, and first of all, I have a pretty good vocabulary, but I had to go back and clear a lot of words and phrases. You have an amazing command of the English language, and your writing is rich. It's excellent. It's excellent writing. I enjoy it just because of the quality of the writing.
Thank
So
you.
I encourage you to continue, even if it's just an exercise in catharsis. You know what I mean? And maybe after this video series comes out, which at this point we have so much material that I need to edit that it's going to be months. It's going to be months. When it comes out, people will probably have a lot more questions, and then maybe that could be the foundation for your continued writing. So
that'd be good. In order for me to write something more, I have to be communicating something to somebody. Otherwise, I'm just writing to myself, and that doesn't do it for me. I don't do that.
Right. All right, you guys heard it. So if you have questions, I mean, we've given you a lot of data in these 4 or 5 videos that we've recorded. There's a ton of material here, and while I try to delve in, you know, and kind of go a little deeper, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like, I gotta ask him about this. What did he mean when he said this? How dare he? You know, all kind of kerfluffles will occur, and that could be a good basis for a book.
Absolutely.
I'd buy it.
What's the next? Go ahead. What's the next question?
Now that so many Scientologists are out of the church and scattered, and not all of them are in the free zone, what should these individuals be doing? I'm assuming asking if they want to continue in Scientology or whatever. Take the question as is. I'll repeat it again. Now that so many Scientologists are out of the church and scattered, and not all of them are in the free zone, what should these individuals be doing?
I can give a very general and philosophical answer, and that is follow Shakespeare's advice. And to your own self, be true.
Very good. That's your answer. Okay. Yeah. All right. We're actually almost done here with the viewer questions and the whole series here. I'm getting excited. I can actually start editing. Any interesting observations about Ron the human, i.e., what was he like as a person when not wearing his founder Commodore hats? Now we've covered a lot of this, but is there anything else you want to say on this subject?
I think I've said it all, but he was very friendly and very willing to be friends and to make friends. He was cheerful, be happy. He would joke. He could be understanding. If he wanted to, or if you gave him an indication that you needed him to listen, he was all attention. And you would feel at once that you were the most important person in the whole universe. He could be, I remember him often, even on the ship, he could look absolutely, well, I guess the word is beautiful, that has, you know, that insinuates certain things which are not true. But he had amazing eyes. And you'd look into his eyes, and it was almost like you were looking into infinity. And they were blue, beautiful blue eyes, very relaxed. And there was just so much space behind his eyeballs. You couldn't fathom it. And there were times when he was talking in a friendly way, and his mouth, the formation of his lips, excuse me, I'm dribbling like an old man. His mouth could be absolutely beautiful, magnificent. Of course, it was very different when he was angry, but When he was high-toned, he was a very beautiful human being. Well, I have to modify that. He was more than a human being. He was too beautiful and too high-toned to be called a human being, as we know human. And he was in his higher tone levels, he was beyond anything that any regular person on the street could ever conceive of. But he could be that way and also relate to people around him, even to strangers, on a very equal footing. Very friendly, as I said, very friendly, courteous. He could have beautiful manners. He'd be very considerate. I remember I'd often be sitting at his desk. He'd be giving me a briefing or talking to me or telling me what he wanted me to do. And if I sneezed, immediately he'd say, "Messenger, close the window. Ken's in a draft." And another thing I remember about him, which is not exactly on the question, but he CS'd my folder, my PC folders. And I had a lot of auditing because for some reason, the auditors down in the ship's HGC would take me into session. And he CS'd it. Now, when he CS'd, he wrote the CS on his white piece of paper, and underneath, as always, there was a piece of carbon paper and then a yellow sheet of paper. Everything he wrote was the top copy white and the carbon sheet on the yellow. And the yellow always came to me for communicator purposes, for filing and recording and following up. And one day, must have been in 73, I think, there was something on his desk that he had lost. And he told me to go through his desk and see if I could find it. And I went through all of the drawers, didn't find it, went to the bottom drawer on the left-hand side, opened it, and there was this big stack of yellows. And I realized those must be the yellows from the CSs he'd written from my folder. And of course, I remembered I had never, ever seen one of those come to my desk. So although he'd done many of them, he had never forgotten to put the yellow in that drawer.
Right. Take it off so you don't see it as a PC, correct?
Yeah. So that's a little bit off the subject, sorry. But as regards dealing with other people, he was you might say he was a master of communication and social relationship when he was high-toned. Absolutely. He could get on with almost anybody.
Very good. Next question. What is your fondest? I think you've already answered this, but just let's ask it again. Maybe there's a different memory. What is your fondest memory of Ron, if you can narrow it down to just one moment?
There would be two moments. That would be, I have described them when you walked into his office and he was standing over there and you walked into his space. And it was unbelievably beautiful, clear, clean, glowing space. And another moment would be when I was sitting with him when he was CSing and enjoying himself so much in helping people sort themselves out. He loved that. It was wonderful to watch and listen to. He taught me so much. I mean, I wasn't even a tech terminal. But he would tell me what he was looking for and finding and what he's going to do about it and why.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, you related that story earlier. And
yes.
It must have been very special.
Yes, it was. There were very special moments with him. And they're very, very, very hard to forget when you get upset with him.
Yeah.
As I said, it was very, very difficult. It was almost impossible to withdraw a legion once given to the high-toned run, even when he got so low-toned and really high-toned.
Okay, we're almost done. We have, I think, 3 more questions here. Well, this leads, what you just said leads right into this. What would you say was LRH's biggest flaw or Achilles heel?
Well, you could say vanity. You could say pride. And it wasn't greed. It wasn't greed for money until later, not until about 1974 did he get very occupied with money for himself. But pride and vanity, I think, were always there. Not always obvious, but present.
Which is the downfall of many a king.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Another lesson there. Okay, so now we've talked about LRH. We have 2 more questions. But I'm gonna ask this one. Just because we've talked about a lot of the good, a lot of the bad. Some people might take this as we're the purists might say we're bashing on him a little bit. Because my whole point in bringing all this stuff up is not to interrogate people or to downgrade the man. It is to as is, to a degree, right? This is as it is. This is how it was. This is truth, for better or for worse. However, I want to talk about what the man did right now and off. So I want, I guess, for you to say, despite all the chaos and the craziness and the bad temper and the Geo and David Miscavige and Quentin and Ben and Mary Sue, what did Ron get right?
He got a lot right. He was definitely a genius in what he could do well. He was a genius in observing and analyzing. Just think of the tone scale and the chart of human evaluation. I think it's very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And to have observed life and to have seen how the tone scale is and how it works and how it manifests in the different ways it's mind-bogglingly genius to me. It's a gift that nobody else comes close to having. Then there's the various scales, which are very useful. Those are all the results of observation and analysis. Then there's the simpler things like the gradient scale, fast flow, all of those. I think those are things that arose out of his understanding of the handling of mental mass, which of course involves flows and masses and gradients. He put clarity into the question of how do you follow the directions of one such as Jesus Christ towards what Christ referred to as the kingdom of heaven. He put clarity on that path. Of course, he didn't think of it in that way, but he also put clarity into what the Buddha guides us into doing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Buddha said was, look into your heart. I can't remember it, but the Buddha says, look into your heart, find what is true and what is false. But the Buddha never says, how exactly do you do that? And nobody has ever said that, how do you do that, until Hubbard said it.
Mm-hmm.
That if you go into session and you follow the process, you will do that. That's what processing is all about.
Right.
So that, I think, is his major contribution, as isness. The as-ising of untruth, as-ising of mental mess.
Agreed.
Okay.
All right. 2 more questions. If you could get something, one more final thing off your chest right now to the world about Scientology or LRH, what would it be?
I think it would be how sad the situation on planet Earth has become. And my suspicion that it's not by accident. I don't know what the intention might be behind this, what I think is a disaster, or whose decision it might have been. But I think part of the sadness is that mankind got itself into a situation where Scientology, as introduced by L. Ron Hubbard, was not welcome. It was spurned and has continued to be spurned to this day. And that situation has been made much, much worse because of the fuss and noise about the Church of Scientology and how it's been misbehaving over the past 3 or 4 decades. That noise, I think, has become the definition of Scientology publicly, which overrides the reality of what the technology of Scientology actually is. So I do not know how this is going to resolve. And as a last thing, I would say, personally, that as far as I'm concerned, I feel as though I have graduated from this level of existence. I could be very wrong. I don't know what's going to happen when this body dies. I don't know what options I will find available to me, but I'm hoping that I will have the option of moving on to a better place.
Amen to that, sir.
Thank you. And also I can say that must be over 50 years ago, I read one of the early books. I think it was 8008. And in there, there's a paragraph in which he simply mentions that a Thetan can have a long cycle in this universe of maybe 250 or 300,000 years. And when I read that as a very young person and rather fresh in Scientology, it struck me as being very true. And what also struck me was that I'm at the end of my long cycle. I'm finishing it, and I have not yet begun the next one. And after I leave this body, my next action will be to begin the next one, if there is another one to be done in this time frame. But I don't know if I'll still be in this universe. And I'm hoping not.
Got it. Final question. This one you can look right at the webcam as if you're talking to a specific person. So a lot of people have fallen off the bridge, are upset, disaffected, hateful about Scientology and LRH, some with cause, some without. So what message do you have for those who are upset or disaffected and have fallen off of the bridge?
I think my first message is that if you are upset or disaffected or have fallen off the bridge, then it's because of developments within the Scientology organization for which I have a direct responsibility. And I would like you to know that I'm extremely sorry that those developments were allowed to proceed. And as to dealing with the upsets or the disaffection or no longer being able to go up the bridge, I can also say, I'm sorry, but I have no solution. And I don't know if there ever will be a solution. I certainly hope so. I'm hoping that there will be a miracle. There might be a miracle amongst the young people who are growing up, and suddenly a lot of them begin to realize that they have been led down a rabbit hole which is going nowhere, and that energizes them to take control. I would encourage that. But for the older people who've been disappointed, I don't know. I simply encourage you to be true to yourself and do your best to live a good life and a happy life. Look after other people. To be sure that in your actions you do and say that which is true and necessary and kind. If you're feeling very down, go find somebody else that's worse off than you and do something to help. But trust yourself. And if you find yourself involved in or attached in any way to the seventh or eighth dynamic, you can pray. You can meditate on sacred texts. And do whatever you can to look after yourself so you can look after other people as best you can. And I repeat something I've said before, a quote from the Buddha. He said, love yourself and watch today, tomorrow, always. And by watch, I take him to mean be aware. Be aware of what's around you and what's going on within you. And make up your own mind about what you want to do about what you perceive, about what's going on around you and within you. But love yourself and be true to yourself. What's more important?
Very wise and kind words, Ken. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I feel like not only are you an interview subject, but you're now a friend, and I hold this friendship in high regard and esteem, and I hope we continue our relationship. Maybe we'll partner up on your writing, maybe assist you there for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
When this comes out,
You get on with that editing now.
yes, exactly. I better hurry up. But thank you so much. I'm really fortunate to have documented your stories, and I think future generations will be blessed to hear this interview, or these interviews, a series of interviews that I'm calling the Urk Files. And all I can do is thank you very much for your candor and your willingness to share. We have just met, virtually, and you've been more than gracious with sharing a lot of deeply personal things, and that's not easy to do. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you very much. Just please remember that one is candid only to the degree that the person one's talking to can embrace it.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely.